The Xarnoth Empire had been the dominant force in the galaxy for as long as anyone could remember. For over 500,000 years, no one had dared to challenge their power. With their advanced technology, unbeatable weapons, and superior tactics, they had crushed every civilization that stood in their way. Their empire stretched across hundreds of star systems, each one conquered and controlled with ease. The Xarnoth were a proud race. They were tall, strong, and ruthless in battle. Their ships were faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen, and their soldiers were almost impossible to defeat. They believed they were invincible, and for 500,000 years, it seemed they were right. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, a new force was growing, a force that would soon challenge the Xarnoth in ways they never expected. The humans. Unlike the Xarnoth, humans had no empire. They were scattered across their own planet, Earth, a small world in a distant star system. Their technology was primitive compared to the Xarnoths, and their armies were nothing to be feared. But there was something about humans that made them different, something that the Xarnoth had never faced before. Humans had an incredible ability to think on their feet. They were inventive, curious, and determined. Where the Xarnoth relied on their weapons and their strength, humans relied on their minds and their creativity. And though they had never fought a war like this before, they had something the Xarnoth didn't, a fierce will to survive. It all started when a small human scout ship wandered too close to the Xarnoth-controlled sector. At first, it seemed like just another routine patrol. The Xarnoth didn't even notice. But when the scout ship picked up something unusual, a signal from a distant star, it was enough to draw attention. The Xarnoth sent a fleet to investigate. Captain Layla West was the leader of that small scout ship. She had no idea that her mission would lead to the beginning of something much bigger. When that Xarnoth fleet appeared on the horizon, she and her crew realized that they had unknowingly crossed into enemy territory. They were vastly outnumbered, with no chance of escaping. Captain West ordered her crew to prepare for battle. But she knew the truth. They were going to lose. The Xarnoth were too powerful. Yet, even in the face of certain defeat, she refused to give up. There was something inside her, something inside every human, that made them fight even when the odds were stacked against them. The Xarnoth fleet attacked with deadly precision, firing their energy weapons that seemed to tear through the very fabric of space. The human ships fought back as best they could, but they were no match for the advanced technology of the Xarnoth. The scout ship was heavily damaged, and many of the crew were injured or killed. But Captain West wouldn't surrender. She held on, knowing that this would not be the end. As the Xarnoth pressed their attack, something strange began to happen. The humans, battered and broken, refused to fall. Despite their defeat, there was a spark of something greater within them. And in that moment, Captain West realized that perhaps, just perhaps, the Xarnoth were not as invincible as they thought. The battle between the humans and the Xarnoth had begun, and Captain Layla West knew it was only a matter of time before they would be overwhelmed. The human scout ship, Vanguard, was no match for the Xarnoth fleet. With each blast from the enemy's energy weapons, the human ship shuddered, sparks flying through the control panels as alarms blared in every corridor. Lila's hands gripped the controls tightly as she tried to keep the ship steady, but the damage was piling up faster than she could repair it. "Captain, we've lost engine power," shouted Lieutenant James, the ship's engineer. His face was pale and his voice shaky, but Leela could hear the resolve in it. "The shields are failing. We won't last much longer." Leela glanced out of the viewports. The Xarnoth fleet was enormous, their ships sleek and deadly, closing in from all sides. The human crew had fought valiantly, but the gap in firepower was impossible to overcome. She turned to her communications officer, Lieutenant Sarah. "Send a distress signal," she ordered. "Maybe we can get reinforcements before." Before she could finish, a huge explosion rocked the Vanguard, throwing everyone off their feet. The lights flickered and went out, and the ship was plunged into darkness. The emergency lights blinked on, casting a red glow across the control room. "Captain, we're taking heavy damage. Hull integrity is at critical levels." Lieutenant James called out again. "We need to abandon ship, now." Leela's heart sank. The Vanguard had been their lifeline. Now it was their tomb. She refused to believe that this was the end, though. Not while there was still a chance to survive. "Prepare the escape pods," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear that gripped her chest. "We're not giving up." Just as the crew began to scramble for the pods, something unexpected happened. The Xarnoth fleet, instead of finishing them off, paused. Their ships held position in space, their energy weapons powered down. It was as if they were waiting. Leela froze, confused. "Why? Why aren't they attacking?" Lieutenant Sarah whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. The Xarnoth commander, a tall, imposing figure, appeared on the ship's main display. His face was cold and unreadable, his deep-set eyes glaring down at them. "You are outmatched, humans," he said, his voice low and echoing. "But your spirit is impressive. You have fought well for such fragile creatures." Leela clenched her fists. The Xarnoth had never spoken to any of their enemies before. It was clear that they didn't view humans as a threat. At least, not yet. "We are not fragile," Leela replied, her voice firm, despite the danger. "You've underestimated us." The Xarnoth commander's lips curled into a brief smile. "Perhaps, but I have no time for games. Your fleet is destroyed, and you will surrender. This is your only chance." Leela's eyes narrowed. "We'll never surrender." For the first time in centuries, the Xarnoth faced something they hadn't expected: defiance. The commander studied Leela for a long moment, as if deciding something in his mind. "Very well," he said. "We shall see if your species can truly survive what is to come." With that, the transmission ended, and the Xarnoth fleet began to move again, leaving the humans to wonder just how far this battle would go. The damage to the Vanguard was devastating. What remained of the human fleet was scattered and disorganized, their ships barely holding together after the Xarnoth assault. Yet, amid the wreckage, something surprising happened. The humans, though beaten, did not give up. The spirit of defiance that had sparked the first moments of resistance was far from extinguished. Captain Leela West stood in the war room of the damaged Vanguard, surrounded by her remaining officers. The quiet hum of the ship's backup systems was the only sound that filled the room, and the air was heavy with tension. Her crew was exhausted, their faces grim. They had fought against impossible odds, and they had lost. At least, that's what everyone expected. But Leela knew something no one else could see. There was something unique about humanity, something that Xarnoth had never faced before. "Captain," Lieutenant Sarah said, breaking the silence. "We're stranded. No reinforcements are coming. We can't keep going like this." Leela's eyes scanned the map of the galaxy displayed on the screen in front of her. The Xarnoth had taken control of nearly every system, and the humans were cornered. The enemy ships, fast and efficient, patrolled every star system with no mercy. But in her gut, Leela felt something stirring, something more than just fear. It was the spark of hope, born from the very thing that made humanity different. "We've been through worse," Leela said, her voice steady. "We've been knocked down before, and we always find a way to stand up. This is no different." The room went quiet. The officers exchanged glances, some doubtful, others nodding, sensing the fire that still burned in their captain. "Humans don't give up," Leela continued. "We're resourceful. We'll find a way." They had learned over the past few decades that humanity's greatest strength wasn't just technology or firepower. It was their creativity. Humans could adapt, think on their feet, and turn the tide of battle in the most unexpected ways. The Xarnoth relied on strength, order, and predictability. They believed they were perfect. But humanity was unpredictable. Leela turned to her engineering officer, Lieutenant James, who had been working tirelessly to keep the ship running. James, how fast can we get our systems back online? We need to be ready for anything. James looked up from his console, wiping sweat from his forehead. It's going to take some time, Captain, but we can make it work. I've been looking through the debris from our last encounter. I think I can modify our shield generators with some spare parts. It won't be perfect, but it'll give us a fighting chance. Leela nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Good. Get to work on it. Everyone else, we need to come up with a strategy. We may be outmatched, but we're not out of options. As the officers got to work, Lila looked out of the viewports. The stars outside were quiet, distant. For a moment, she wondered how it had come to this, how a small, isolated species like humanity had come to stand against the might of the Xarnoth. But then she remembered their history. They had faced adversity before, whether it was wars on their own planet, natural disasters, or the unknown challenges of space. Humanity had always found a way to survive, and this time would be no different. Get ready, Leela muttered to herself. The Xarnoth will soon learn what humans are capable of. The Vanguard drifted silently in the shadow of a distant moon, its hull damaged but still holding together. Captain Layla West stood before the war room's table, her crew gathered around her. The tension was thick, but there was a new fire in their eyes. They had been defeated, yes, but not broken. And now, with a desperate sense of purpose, they were ready to strike back. Leela looked over at Lieutenant James, who had worked tirelessly on the ship's systems. He had managed to get the shields partially online, enough to provide some protection, but not nearly enough to stand up to a full attack. The rest of the crew had been busy gathering data, analyzing the Xarnoth tactics, and studying their enemies' weaknesses. They didn't have superior weapons or numbers, but they had something just as valuable: their minds. I know it looks impossible, Leela began, her voice calm but firm. But we can turn this around. The Xarnoth think they've won. They believe we're just an annoyance. But we can do something they never expected. We're going to fight them on our terms. Lieutenant Sarah raised an eyebrow. How, Captain? They outgun us in every way. Leela nodded. True, but they're predictable. They rely on their strength, their superior firepower, their perfect strategies. But that's where we have the advantage. We don't fight like them. We don't think like them. And that's exactly how we're going to win. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The crew was quiet, waiting for her plan. We'll need to use everything we've got, Leela continued. James, I want you to take those modified shield generators and tweak them. I want them to work in a way that Xarnoth won't expect. Use their own energy against them. James nodded, a spark of excitement in his eyes. I've been thinking about that. I can modify the shields to reflect their energy blasts. It won't be perfect, but it could give us a chance to turn the tables. Leela smiled, encouraged by the engineer's confidence. Good. Sarah, I want you to gather all the data we've collected on Xarnoth tactics. We need to learn everything we can about their ship formations and how they communicate. The more we know, the better we can exploit their weaknesses. Sarah's fingers flew across the console as she began accessing the databanks. I'll get on it right away, Captain. Perfect, Leela said. And the rest of you, we're going to need a distraction. A big one. Something that will draw their attention away from our real attack. Lieutenant Mark, the ship's communications officer, spoke up. We could send a false signal, make them think we're retreating to a nearby planet. Leela nodded. Exactly. If we can trick them into thinking we're vulnerable, we can lead them into an ambush. We've learned that the Xarnoth are overconfident, and that will be their downfall. If we play our cards right, they won't see us coming. The crew exchanged looks of determination. This wasn't going to be easy, and it would be risky. But they had no other choice. It was time to make their move. Leela turned to face the stars outside, her heart racing with a mix of hope and anxiety. They were about to face their greatest challenge, but she knew one thing for sure. The Xarnoth had underestimated humanity, and that was going to cost them. "Prepare yourselves," she said quietly. "We're about to show them what humans are truly capable of." The vanguard drifted through the shadows of a nearby asteroid field, the crew silently preparing for the most dangerous move of their lives. Captain Layla West paced back and forth, her mind racing with the plan they had put together. The next few hours would determine everything. If it failed, they would be crushed by the Xarnoth. If it worked, maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide of this war. Leela's eyes fixed on the main viewport. The Xarnoth fleet was just beyond the field, waiting. They had tracked the humans' distress signal, and they were closing in quickly. The humans had managed to stay hidden for a short while, but the Xarnoth would soon realize they were walking into a trap. "Shields are ready, Captain," Lieutenant James reported, his voice steady but filled with tension. He had spent the last few hours fine-tuning the modifications to their shield generators. The plan was risky, but they had no other option. "Good," Layla replied. "We only get one chance at this. If we mess up, we're done for." "We won't mess up," Lieutenant Sarah said with confidence, her eyes scanning the data streams. "We've got everything in place. The Xarnoth won't know what hit them." Leela nodded. The false signal had been sent, and the Xarnoth fleet had responded, moving in to finish off what they thought was a broken human force. But what they didn't know was that the humans weren't retreating. They were luring the Xarnoth into the heart of the asteroid field, where their ships would be forced to maneuver carefully. It was the perfect spot for an ambush. "Now we wait," Leela said, watching the tactical display closely. The Xarnoth were getting closer, their ships forming a tight, almost impenetrable formation. They were eager to strike, too eager. The humans' small fleet, battered and broken, seemed like easy prey to them. But the Xarnoth had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity's ability to think on their feet. "Ready the modified shields," Leela commanded. "We need to hold them off long enough to get in close." The crew moved quickly, their nerves on edge. Every second felt like an eternity. Then the first Xarnoth ship broke through the asteroid field and entered the trap. Their energy weapons fired, cutting through the debris. But the humans were ready. Lieutenant James activated the new shield system. The Xarnoth blasts hit the human shields, but instead of absorbing the energy, the shields reflected it back at the enemy with devastating force. The first Xarnoth ship was struck by its own blast, and it exploded in a fiery burst. The crew stared in shock. It had worked. "Captain, it's working," Sarah shouted. "They're confused. The Xarnoth are falling into disarray." Leela's heart raced. The tide was turning. The humans' attack had created chaos in the Xarnoth fleet. The enemy ships, now hesitant, fired in all directions, unsure of where to strike. The humans quickly exploited the opening, launching their own counterattacks with precision. "Stay on target," Leela ordered, her voice steady. "We need to finish this." The battle raged on, but for the first time, the Xarnoth were the ones on the defensive. The humans, unpredictable and creative, had done the unthinkable. They had turned their own weakness into a strength, and now the Xarnoth knew what it felt like to be outmatched. As the last of the Xarnoth ships fell, Leela allowed herself a small smile. This was only the beginning, but the humans had proven something important today. They could fight back. And in a war where no one expected them to win, that made all the difference. The aftermath of the battle was chaotic. The vanguard and the remaining human ships had inflicted serious damage on the Xarnoth fleet, but there was little time to celebrate. The humans were far from safe. The Xarnoth were powerful, and this victory, though significant, would not end the war. In fact, it was likely to escalate things. Captain Leela West stood in the war room, her eyes fixed on the stars outside the viewport. The enemy was still out there, regrouping, and it wouldn't be long before they came for the humans again. The human fleet was small, damaged, and scattered, but they had proved one thing to the Xarnoth. They weren't going down without a fight. "What's our next move, Captain?" Lieutenant Sarah asked, her voice quiet, but full of concern. The crew knew their options were running thin. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Leela took a deep breath. "We prepare for the next phase. We can't keep relying on surprise tactics. We need reinforcements, and we need to learn more about the Xarnath. We can't outgun them, but we can outthink them." Just as she spoke, a sudden message flashed across the communication screen. It was a transmission from an unknown source. Lila's hand hovered over the console, hesitating for a moment. There was a chance it was a trick, a trap set by the Xarnath to lure them in. But then she saw the signal. It wasn't from the enemy. "Put it through," Leela ordered. The screen flickered, and the face of an alien appeared. He was tall, with sharp features and a commanding presence, but his face was not like the usual cold, calculating Xarnath. He looked tired, conflicted. His voice was steady, but laced with urgency. "I am General Kaler of the Xarnath," he said, "and I need your help." Leela froze. A Xarnath general, asking for help. It made no sense. "You've been fighting your own people?" she asked, her voice cautious. Kaler nodded. "Yes, I am not like the others. I believe the Xarnath are on the wrong path. They seek only conquest and destruction. I want to stop them." The room fell silent. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. This was dangerous. Trusting an enemy officer, especially one from a race that had never shown mercy, was a huge risk. But Leela felt something in Kaler's words, something that suggested he was telling the truth. "Why now?" Leela asked, still wary. "Why come to us?" Kaler's expression darkened. "Because the Emperor of the Xarnath is preparing for a final devastating attack on your world. I can't stop them alone. But together, we might have a chance." Leela took a long pause, weighing the decision. She had no love for the Xarnath, but Kaler was offering them something invaluable. Information, a potential ally from within the enemy's ranks. The risk was high, but the reward could be even greater. "You're asking us to trust you," Leela said slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "But I'll need proof. Show me that you're not leading us into a trap." Kaler's face softened slightly. "I understand. I'll provide all the information you need. The Xarnath fleet's next move, their weaknesses, their strategies. I'll help you take them down, but only if you accept my offer." Leela's mind raced. This could change everything. She knew that the fate of her crew, her people, and possibly the entire galaxy was at stake. Trusting a defecting Xarnath general seemed impossible, but in this war, the unexpected was their only advantage. "I'll speak with my crew," Leela said finally, "but we'll need time to decide. We can't afford to make a mistake." Kaler gave a slight nod. "I understand. I will be waiting." As the transmission ended, Leela turned to her crew. Their faces were filled with disbelief, but there was also hope. A dangerous alliance was their best shot at survival. But they had to be careful. One wrong move could mean the end of them all. The decision had been made. Against all odds, Captain Leela West and her crew had agreed to form an alliance with General Kaler. The Xarnath officer had given them crucial intelligence about the enemy's plans, and though it was a dangerous gamble, it was their only option. The humans now knew the Xarnath's next target, Earth itself. The final attack was coming. The Xarnath fleet, prepared to crush humanity once and for all, was assembling at the edge of the solar system. Leela had no illusions about what would happen if they failed. Earth would fall, and with it, the last hope for human resistance. The Vanguard was still heavily damaged, but it was all they had left. The small human fleet, now reinforced with some modified ships from Kaler's defecting soldiers, had gathered near a small moon just outside Earth's orbit. Their numbers were few, their resources even fewer, but there was no turning back. "Captain," Lieutenant James said, his voice tense as he worked at his console, We've finished making the final adjustments to the shields, but I still don't know if it'll hold up against the Xarnoth flagship's weapons." Leela glanced over at him. She knew the stakes. "We'll make it work. We don't have a choice. This is our last chance to turn things around." Lieutenant Sarah, standing at another console, spoke up. "We've also got a new plan for the attack, Captain. Using the intelligence Kaler provided, we've found a weak point in their fleet formation. If we hit them right there, we can take down their command ship. Without that, the rest of their fleet will fall apart." Leela nodded. The plan was risky, but it was their best shot. "All right, everyone, get ready. We go in fast, and we go in hard. We don't have much time before the Xarnoth realize what we're doing." The human fleet, a ragtag collection of ships and fighters, moved into position, hidden behind the dark side of the moon. They could only make one pass. They had no time for mistakes. Lila's pulse quickened as the countdown began. She felt the weight of the moment. The future of humanity depended on this attack. There was no room for failure. "On my mark," Leela said, her voice steady. "We break cover and head straight for their command ship. Stay close and keep your distance from their larger warships." The crew was silent as the seconds ticked down. They knew what was at stake. They had been through so much already. Losses, sacrifices, and battles they should never have won. But now, they were on the brink of something bigger than any of them had imagined. "Now," Leela shouted, and the human fleet surged forward, breaking out from their hiding place behind the moon. The Xarnoth fleet hadn't yet spotted them, and for a moment it was as if the universe had held its breath. The humans had the element of surprise. As they raced toward the Xarnoth flagship, the humans' modified shields reflected the first few blasts from the enemy, throwing the Xarnoth into confusion. The human ships flew with precision, avoiding the deadly fire of the larger warships while closing in on their target. The Xarnoth fleet scrambled to respond, but the humans were already inside their formation. Leela's heart pounded as she locked eyes with the viewports, watching the Xarnoth flagship grow larger. "Hold steady. We're almost there." The human fleet unleashed everything they had, blasting through the Xarnoth defenses. The command ship's weak spot, identified through Kaler's information, finally gave way, sending shockwaves through the Xarnoth fleet. The tide was turning. The humans had struck at the heart of the Xarnoth Empire, but Leela knew this was just the beginning. The real test was still to come. The battle was chaos. The Vanguard and its fleet of modified ships had plunged into the heart of the Xarnoth formation, striking with everything they had. Energy blasts, missiles, and laser fire filled the dark expanse of space as the human ships weaved and dodged through the barrage from the larger Xarnoth warships. But despite their small numbers, the humans were relentless. They had nothing left to lose, and they fought with the desperation of those who knew the stakes. The Xarnoth flagship was a massive vessel, towering over the human fleet. But it was weak, vulnerable in ways the humans had only just discovered. General Kaler's intelligence had been invaluable, pointing out the critical weak spot in the flagship's hull. The humans had struck that point with precision, and now the Xarnoth flagship was beginning to show signs of collapse. Explosions rocked the ship as the human forces continued their assault. "Captain, the flagship is destabilizing," Lieutenant Sarah shouted, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Their shields are failing. It's working." Leela could hardly believe it. The Xarnoth, who had been undefeated for 500,000 years, were faltering before their eyes. The flagship was slowly losing its ability to defend itself, and the human fleet, though battered, pressed on. Leela knew this was their moment. The Xarnoth might still have the numbers, but without their flagship, their command would be in chaos. "Keep pushing forward," Leela ordered. "We need to finish this." The human ships swarmed like bees, targeting any weakness they could find. Every blast from the Xarnoth was met with a strategic counter, their attacks deflected by the human-modified shields or dodged with quick, nimble moves. The Xarnath, who had relied on their overwhelming power and predictability for centuries, were now confused and disoriented. As the Xarnath flagship began to break apart, the remaining ships in the fleet began to panic. The Xarnath had always known how to fight as a single unit, but with their leadership ship in ruins, they were left in disarray. Their communication lines scrambled, and their once precise formation began to unravel. "We've done it," Lieutenant James said in awe, his fingers flying over the control panel. "Their fleet is falling apart. They're retreating." The Xarnath, for the first time in 500,000 years, were fleeing. Their empire, once so powerful and certain, was crumbling under the weight of an unexpected attack. Lila's heart raced. The victory was within reach, but she couldn't afford to let her guard down. The Xarnath were still dangerous, and the fight wasn't over yet. As the last of the Xarnath ships retreated, Lila allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. The Vanguard had taken heavy damage, and many of the human ships were in no better shape. But they had done the impossible. The Xarnath Empire, the unstoppable force that had crushed all in its path for centuries, was now in retreat. The humans had done what no one thought possible. They had defeated the Xarnath. Lila's eyes turned to the viewports once more. Earth, their home, was still safe. The human fleet had won, but the cost had been great. As the remaining Xarnath ships disappeared into the stars, Lila knew this victory was just the beginning of a new era. Humanity had proven itself capable of more than anyone had ever believed. And the Xarnath would never forget the lesson they had learned today. The war was over. For the first time in 500,000 years, the Xarnath Empire had been defeated. The humans, who had once seemed like nothing more than a footnote in the galaxy's history, had proven that they were capable of extraordinary things. They had stood against the most powerful force in the universe and emerged victorious. Captain Lila West stood in the quiet of the war room, looking out at the stars. The Xarnath were gone, their fleet in ruins, their empire shattered. The human fleet had taken heavy losses, and the damage to the Vanguard was severe. But it didn't matter. They had won. They had done what no one thought possible. "We did it," Lieutenant Sarah said softly, her voice filled with disbelief. "We really did it." Lila turned to her crew, her heart swelling with pride. They had all risked everything, and together they had overcome impossible odds. Each of them had played a part in this victory, from the engineers who had modified the shields, to the pilots who had fought with everything they had, to the defecting Xarnath soldiers who had helped them understand the enemy's tactics. "We did it because we didn't give up," Lila replied, her voice steady. "We didn't follow the rules. We didn't play by their playbook. We did it because we believed in each other." The crew nodded, a sense of relief and accomplishment washing over them. But Lila knew the work wasn't over. The Xarnath were defeated for now, but the galaxy was still full of dangers. Other enemies would rise, and humanity had to be ready for whatever came next. "We have to rebuild," Lila said, her tone serious. "We need to strengthen our forces, repair our ships, and learn everything we can from this victory. The Xarnath won't be the last threat we face. But for today, we have won. And that's something we can never forget." As the crew began to prepare for the long road ahead, Lila turned her attention back to the viewports. Earth was still safe, still whole. The people of the planet didn't know it yet, but they had just been saved by the most unlikely of forces: human ingenuity, resilience, and determination. A message from Earth came through the communications channel. It was a signal from the President of the United Nations. His voice crackled over the speaker, but the message was clear. "Captain West," the President said, "we have received news of your victory. We stand united, stronger than ever before. Humanity owes you and your crew a debt that can never be repaid. We are forever in your debt." Lila smiled, her eyes filled with pride and a sense of accomplishment. The war was over, but the story of humanity's resilience would continue. Their victory would be remembered for generations to come. As the Vanguard prepared to return to Earth, Lila knew this was only the beginning. The universe was vast, and humanity had proven it could survive in it. They had faced the impossible and conquered it. And now, they were ready to face whatever challenges the future would bring. The human race had not just survived, they had thrived. And that was something the galaxy would never forget.